Hello and welcome to Circle Time, the Early Years podcast. I'm Glenn Denny, and my guest this week, they're an experienced teacher and they've got a passion for providing children with access to a curriculum that works for them, developing keen interest in early years education and special educational needs throughout their career. Welcome along to the podcast, Simon Airey.
Hi, Glenn. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
No, absolute pleasure. It's quite a big topic, really, isn't it? And it's funny on old thing. It was something I've been talking about with some of my colleagues earlier this week about how, like, particularly within schools, not so much in terms of early year settings, particularly the private ones, but more in schools where curriculums don't always work for individual children. It's not always. It's not one size fits all.
Absolutely. I think you're looking essentially at running more than one curriculum or one curricula in schools now. You've got the academic curriculum with the stuff that you have to cover, but then running alongside that is it's almost those adaptations you've got to make for either diagnosed neurodivergent learners or those children, which is probably the biggest group of all, those children who are emerging neurodivergent learners and they haven't yet been diagnosed or the process for their SEND pathway has been started. So yeah, there's a lot there in terms of not just with early years, but through the whole, the whole time that children are at school. There's a lot there to unpick, and I think you're right in saying that the curriculum that we provide for children, it needs a lot of sort of pulling apart and lots of putting other things in place to ensure that the children who do have additional needs or are neurodivergent can access learning opportunities.
Yeah, it's learning opportunities that work for them as well, isn't it? I mean, certainly from my experience, and I'm by no means a SEN expert. I'm really not. I'm not SEN trained. I have worked with lots of different children with differing needs from, like neurodivergence and like lots of other different types of needs. But certainly early years, it's more adaptable because we have that freedom almost, like particularly in the PVI sector, which is the sector I work in. You've got that freedom to adapt and change and just be free to do what you want through the day almost. Like, I'm not saying it's a complete free fall, but there is that adaptability, there is that scope for it. Whereas I don't know if you'd agree, but schools seem to be a bit stricter. I mean, it's almost like they're kind of forced into a box, is the way I'm kind of looking at it. But if I'm wrong, I need to be told that, because that's my view right now. But am I wrong?
There's so much wonderful practice that happens within the early years, and there's no coincidence why, for me, it's called the early years foundation stage. And the foundations that we give children between 0 and 5 are incredible. We give them opportunities for play, for movement, for self-directed learning. And it really makes me sad that when the children get to year 1, it's that period where I would love to sort of carry on play throughout the children's school life, because it's proven it works and you can't get it wrong. You can't play in a wrong way. And those practices that we put in place for children that in early years, if you go into an early years classroom, you'd see children self-selecting resources. You'd see them, some children sitting down on the floor, you see children lying on the floor, standing up, and whatever. So I call them more sort of adaptive, sort of developmental considerations, in that, the classic example I can think of was, of a child that's 5, trying to sort of push them towards, like, having a tripod grip to write, when actually children don't necessarily need a tripod grip in to be able to write. They can form letters with I still call it a fist grip. I know there's another name for it, but there's
palmar grasp.
That's it. And I think that there's a lot there in early years that needs to be sort of taken up. It needs to be taken further, because even though we have the national curriculum for sort of year 1 upwards, it doesn't say how we should teach those objectives, we're free to sort of decide
Mm.
in whatever way we want to do them. And the biggest successes I've seen in my sort of latter part of my teaching career is that I've worked with older children. I started off in Key Stage 1, and then I moved to early years, stayed in early years for a while, and then currently I do supply teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I do find that when you do make things a bit more, I'd call it play based rather than true play,
Yeah.
then you do see I do see the engagement levels almost change, because suddenly you're seeing children potentially with quite complex needs. So even with more than one neurotype, I've seen children with ADHD and autism, for example,
Mm-hmm.
who struggle to engage because it's the traditional curriculum is cognitive overload for those children.
Yeah.
And when we change it into what we know works as early years practitioners, when we change it into that style, that's where I found the biggest successes.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree. I mean, I think play, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts, but play is that misunderstood word, but yet actually it's key to everything that we do. Play is learning, play is what it's about, play is the way to engage a child. And yet it's still misunderstood by adults. It's almost like some adults have forgotten that that's how they learn stuff, by playing.
Yeah, I think people think of play as, free for all, like
Mhm.
here's everything, and you just go and do what you want with it. When actually, for those of us that have worked in early years classrooms or who have observed in early years classrooms, there's very subtle things that happen within early years classrooms that provide those building blocks. If you watch children play, it's not chaos at all. It's actually
Mm.
the child's thought processes and what they want to do with the environment that we provide for them. It's quite astonishing what they do with it. And I also think, for me, with early years, the moment it clicked for me is when I thought, okay, I'm watching what the kids are doing, then I'm going to provide the enhancements to add
Yeah.
to that provision. So once I got my head around what continuous provision was and how it should be sort of ideally presented, and then what the children do with it,
Mhm.
there's sort of no ceiling there. There's no ceiling to what the children do
Yeah.
with it, and it's our job. We've got to add the sort of. It's almost like I can't remember the name now, but someone described it more like the continuous provision is like your supermarket, where you've got all the aisles with all the same things in aisle 1, aisle 2, all
Mhm.
the way up to the checkout. But the enhancements are the special offers that you have at the end. So suddenly you've got
Yeah.
30% of this at the end. So you're providing those little additional extras at the end. And it's almost those additional extras are those little nuggets of those little golden nuggets of stuff that you see.
Mhm.
Actually, I've seen the children doing this with the loose parts today. What did they make with it? Yes, they made cars, for example, with it. So therefore, the next day I'm going to add something to enhance that. And I don't see why that can't work further up.
Mhm.
It's almost that sort of practice stops and then formal learning takes over.
No, I totally agree. I mean, so in the last year, I've worked in Scotland again. I mean, most of my career has been in Scotland. I've only been in England for 4 or 5 years, although I had a break and went back up to Scotland and came back. But it's interesting, in Scotland, they're trying, there is a massive campaign, which is it's gaining momentum, and it could well happen, where they're trying to introduce like a kindergarten stage. So like almost like year one, possibly year two will disappear, and it's more play based coming back in, because the benefits of it are being seen, they're being heard, and for some people they are being understood. And I think you're right. I think particularly, having worked with some neurodivergent children, I know that being able to go and find something that interests them, and just having that freedom to go and do it. And like you say, like, we're just sort of nearby, just ready to add something to, not to interfere, not to jump in. And that's a really difficult balancing act for practitioners and for teaching staff, not to just jump in and take over. It's that bit where, like you say, like if they're playing with cars, it's like, well, you could add some one of our favorites at the moment is that washi tape with the road markings on it. I've actually stuck it all over a table because they like to drive up and down tables. But having that later, or sort of at the early part of school, year one, year two, it would be hugely beneficial, not just for those children with SEN, but all children, that they're able to kind of make sense of things.
I think I'm a big fan of the thought that any sort of inclusive strategy will not just benefit neurodivergent children, will actually benefit everybody. And there's a lot of sort of neurodivergent strategies that, we're taught that they're sort of, particularly for those children, something like, fidget toys or sensory tools that I think those, I've seen them used very successfully with everybody.
Yeah.
And I know there's some people who don't like them because they're seen as distracting, they're seen as sort of interfering. Well, actually, the sensory tools meet a need. And actually, when we view children's behaviour, the biggest game changer for me was when I started to view the behaviour as sort of what's above the iceberg, and then below the sort of surface of the water, you've then got the behaviours communicating some kind of feeling and need. And I think all these little bits now that we add in for neurodivergent learners, there's no reason why it cannot be used for everybody, because you just never know that you may have a neurotypical child who comes in the morning. Usually they come in okay, but one morning they may come in really upset about something, and actually they should be able to access the same strategies as neurodivergent children, which is whether calm corner, safe space, etc. So it's that true meaning of inclusivity, that it's it is for everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was listening to you there just now, it's for me, it's every child is unique. Every child is an individual, and their neurodiversity or their neurotypical state is just part of who they are. So, like the example you were given about child coming in the morning, we've got one child at the moment where just occasionally she just gets upset. I mean, mum's due to have a baby, so there is a lot of up and down at the moment, which is fine. We understand that, but she doesn't necessarily understand that. But the one thing she said to mum coming in was, "It's okay if I get upset, I'll get a cuddle." And because she knows us and we know her, we know that giving her a cuddle is what she needs. That is her need at that moment. She needs a cuddle to settle. And it's going back to, like you're saying, like with the fidget toys and that. I had another child in one of my settings where he got a bit overloaded with things. Like, there was no diagnosis of anything, any neurodivergence, but we felt there was. But it was one of those bits where we had that box with the fidget toys, and they weren't distracting. They were soothing for him. He was able to just focus his mind, concentrate and calm onto this whatever toy he'd picked out of the box. And I think it's sometimes, I agree with you, there's some teachers out there or practitioners that think, yes, it's going to be really distracting. Well, yeah, it is, but it's how you handle it as an adult. Like, do you need to take that child to one side and say, right, would you like to choose one of these? It's all these things, but it's looking at children as individuals.
Once we sort of model those sort of strategies for children, because we sometimes forget, like, the very youngest children are developing at a massive rate, and they need to sort of feed off our calm, our sort of like security, our regulation strategies, because the only real way to help children is we co-regulate with them, because they haven't yet always got the self-regulation skills to be able to cope with those big emotions. And I really like the example that you gave of those particular children in your care. And I think it's in EYFS, those prime areas, those, the PSED, the communication and the physical development, these are all biologically driven, and there's no coincidence that these are the prime areas. And this is another thing that gets lost at the end of reception, in that children are still developing as they go into year 1, year 2, all the way up to year 6 and then secondary school. So I find it confusing that these areas almost, I want to say, get left by the wayside a little bit in terms of the formal the formal stuff. And if we keep think at sort of forefront of our mind that if the children aren't regulated, then learning is going to be really difficult
Mm-hmm.
for them. And it could be little things. I can remember an example of a child who came in, they were distraught about something, and it took them a long time to say what it was. And it ended up being that this child was upset because they were in a rush in the morning, and mum forgot to feed the cat in the morning. And this was part of this child's routine. They got dressed, they made sure the cat had food before they left, but because they're in such a rush, they forgot to feed the cat. And the child thought that the cat wasn't going to get any food. But teasing that out is, we phoned mum, and she got it. Luckily, she wasn't too far away from home, but she went home and fed the cat.
Oh no, yeah, it's absolutely that, isn't it? It's finding those, I mean, children do come in and are upset, and it doesn't matter about their need. That's their need right there, right now. Is is the cat fed? And we have had other, you're sitting there talking about that, and I'm like, I've probably got a dozen more examples exactly the same where, a child has come in upset, and it's taken us a while to soothe them, to calm them down, where they're in a state where they can actually then tell us what it is. And it is interesting that, we look at a sen as being almost like we put that into a box, but it's not. It's sen is everybody. Sen, like some children have got more additional needs almost, but everyone has got needs that need meeting. That's why they're called needs. Everybody has needs, and we're there to kind of to meet them, and that's where that individual aspect comes from.
I agree. The personalized learning that we give, personalized support that we give children is quite astonishing sometimes. I mean, if you look at the length of the day of 6.5 hours during the day, about how many sort of decisions or how much we talk to children or what we tell children, is quite astonishing what we do during the day. And I think, I don't know, there's something about the very youngest children about, we're the first, in some cases, we're the first adults that the children have been with outside the adults who are at their home. And you think with things like, separation anxiety, you think about, sensory overload, the overwhelm of the environment, all of those things. And, sometimes as early years practitioners in particular, we probably need to give ourselves more credit for what we do with these particular children, because they come, I think back to the September to July, that sort of period of that whole year where we have the children, and data's there in terms of the early years foundation stage profile, but what that doesn't show us is the amount of growth and development, personal development, those children have made in that year. And you think, child very upset at the start of the year, had to have a staggered start, and then by the end of the year they're able to separate, they come into the nursery or reception, and they absolutely thrive. It's almost that sort of stuff that I give myself more, a bit more of a pat on the back, or rather than the percentage of children that have met the EYFSP, because neurodivergent children are not going to meet all of the they're not going to be expected in all areas by the end of the year because of their spiky neurodivergent profile. They're not going to meet it all.
Yeah, I think it's right. It's almost going back to what we were saying there at the start. It's like it's trying to. I mean, anybody that knows me is I hate formal curriculums. I hate them with a passion. I just think play is the way, and it should be free and should be expressed. And we're looking at developmental milestones and celebrating them, celebrating when they achieve milestones, no matter what their age, when they do it, whether they're ahead of it, whether they're above it, whatever. And it is that bit where we're almost trying to cram children into a cookie cutter style curriculum that's just not set up for them. And it's, you were talking about data there as well. And sometimes the data makes it look like they're failing, but they're not. There's so much more to celebrate them. And that's where, again, going back to individual children, it's like, have we got that approach where we can celebrate those milestones that that child has made, whether they align to, EYFS or not? Are we celebrating them enough?
I think that the mention of play is the way. I think combine that with movement, because I think movement is the pinnacle of what we offer children. You know, things like, having phonics for, above 10 minutes a day is too much. It's too much for children. And I think the more movement and the more play, the more in uninterrupted play that children have, it's almost, now someone said to me the other day, they are of the viewpoint that movement moves the data. The more movement that children have, the more moving they can do, particularly outside, the access to the outside classroom. Then, the more that they are going to develop in terms of their physical development, the communication, the personal, social, emotional development as well. I think that's absolutely key. And there's things that we can do if we have to do phonics for 10 minutes. We can provide movement opportunities within that time. If we're doing maths whole class, we can make that movement as well. It's realizing that mixture of what we're teaching the children, young children, and how we can present that in a manageable way, because too long they're not going to retain it all. And I think as we go into sort of year one, for example, I think one of the biggest things for that is the teacher's done lots of talking. They've probably made the session interactive, the whole class session interactive. I think when the children go from the carpet to doing some kind of formal independent work, there's something happens there, because suddenly I think, because they've been concentrating and trying to listen so much to what's being taught, I think that sudden movement to taking all that in, trying to take it all in, and then trying to do it by themselves is overload. It's cognitive overload. So we have to look at, well, how can we make that more manageable? And the answer I keep coming back to is not sitting at a table doing it in a book. I think there's the play, putting it into play or providing the opportunities through play, I think would have a lot more benefit for it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting there going, yes, yes, yeah. Like, I know I hate tick boxes, but I was ticking along everything you were saying there. I mean, so one nursery I've worked at as manager was an outdoor nursery, and the amount of physical skills. So we were very free flow. Everything just it happened. The day revolved around the children, not revolved around us. The only routines we had was we had snack at a certain time, but it was free flow. You could come and go when you wanted to, and it was the same at lunchtime. The children had the choice of to go in during these times. We just told them when it was about to close. They had 10 minutes and lunch was about to close. And that's how it worked. That was our day. We had pickup time, but the rest of the day it flowed around the children. And the amount of movement and physical skills, they were so physically able, but there was a calmness about it as well. So we would have 34 children, but they were spread out across the woods, across the garden. There was no noise level or anything. And because they were able to do that and they were picking up sticks and moving, there was all the kind of curriculum stuff going on, all that teaching and learning going on, but it happened organically. And that was, to me, just a brilliant way. And the way you were saying about movement, yeah, I mean, small children are not designed to sit still. They're just not. And I think you need that movement.
I think also that those opportunities the children have through their play, I'm just thinking of a shift now between, I remember when I first started in early years, observations, having to record so much stuff about what the kids, long observations, short observations, incidental observations, whatever, we're all absolutely shattered. And it took away from that, the interacting with the children, because that's what they get the most out of. They get the most out of when we're alongside them, rather than saying, oh, well, we're just watching them. Just stop a minute. Well, I've just got to write that down, or I've just got to take a photograph to put it in your folder and whatever. I mean, from what I understand now, there's not the pressure now to do all that
Mhm.
particular paperwork. It's
No,
more your professional judgment from what you see and what you
yeah.
know about the children. That's the biggest value, isn't it? That's the biggest um,
Oh my goodness,
indicator
yeah.
of what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the same position as you. So I've been in early years over 27 years. And yeah, when I first started in nurseries, it was you had the whole observation, assessment, and planning cycle, and it was just so heavy and paper-based. Oh, I hate paperwork anyway. Um, but now, like the nursery I manage, all I ask of my team is one long observation of their child a month. That's all I want. And we upload a wow moment every day. So it is literally just a photo and a small comment. So the parents get to see a little bit. And it's a talking point for parents. It's an extension of learning at home because the parent can then say, oh, what I see you were doing this today. Look on the app. And that's it. The rest of the time, I want my adults to be with the children because that bond is so key to having secure, happy children. When they're secure and happy, they're learning because they're comfortable at playing and doing things because they know that there's somebody there if they need them.
That connection has to be a
Mhm,
priority, and that starts from even that the home visit, or as soon
mhm,
as you know you've got these children coming in to your setting, that connection you have with the caregivers, the children, it sort of links to trust, security, all of that sort of stuff there, and it's all that has to take precedence over. I'm going to call it compliance. So the
mhm.
notion that this is what we do, this is how we have to behave, this is what we have to do, etc. If the children haven't got connection with the staff, then everything else has to wait. Everything else has to completely wait. And I think I keep coming back round to the fact that all of this stuff goes on in early years, and I don't doubt that it happens probably elsewhere as well, higher up from early years.
Mhm.
But it's just almost as if like the practices that I still do are influenced a lot from my time in um, early years. I mean, I've spent probably in total about 9 or 10 years in early years out of a career of 25 years, but it has such a profound impact on me within early years because
Mhm.
I saw, right, this is where it comes from, and it also taught me that the process of SEND itself, getting the child on the EHCP pathway, for example, I didn't realize how much you could do within that you had to do at the start in order to get that whole process rolling.
Mhm.
I mean, it's quite astonishing the number of steps, the amount of evidence you've got to collect, etc.
Yeah,
But when the HCPs do come through, it does give a bit of a sense of it gives satisfaction, but also leads to frustration because it's never enough what you
yeah.
get. The report, the plan's never enough, the funding's never enough,
Mhm.
and you just feel for these children who deserve what they're entitled to, and they don't get they don't always get everything that they need, and it's up
Yeah,
to the settings to the settings themselves. We do what we need to do for these children and
yeah,
their
right.
families.
It's almost like as settings and as families, like if the family's on board with us, it's like we almost have to go into battle. And like I get it. There's a finite amount of money to fund this, and there is more and more coming through. And it's maybe that we're getting better at recognizing signs, and we know that a child's struggling. We don't want them. I mean, the children come to our settings. We love them like they're our own, and we want them to succeed. We want them to be the best person that they possibly can be. But it's like you say, the whole process of getting anywhere, there's an awful lot of hurdles you've got to jump. And it's like sometimes you just think, why am I doing this? But at the end of the day, you've got to do this because you've got to fight and you've got to advocate for that child that needs that extra bit of support.
I think we're really good now at identifying these needs now. Like if
Mhm,
I think sort of 5 years ago for me, I would never have used the terms sort of neurodiverse or neurodiversity
mhm.
or any of the neuroaffirming language, but now I hear it much more
Yeah,
used readily now in terms of um, the settings that I go to, the staff that are there, and parents for me, they're much more getting their children on that send pathway before they
mhm,
even got into the setting, which is really, really good.
I think you have to as well. I mean, there's some parents, and bless, you get why, but some parents almost put their head in the sand. It's like it's not my child. This isn't happened. But actually, they've got to kind of pull their big pants on and just go for it, because otherwise, I'm not going to say failing their child, because no parent would, deliberately want to fail their child. But it's like there's almost a fear, and it's like don't be afraid. Let's advocate together. Let's work together. There's that partnership between the setting and the family. Let's push together, because what we want is the same thing. We want the very best for this child.
I mean, part of my drive and why I'm so passionate about children who are neurodiverse or emerging neurodiverse is that I'm going through the process of being the autism and ADHD process to being diagnosed myself. And I feel that, it didn't really occur to me until I hit my 40s, where I just thought, yes, I think that's it now. I think there's something there in terms of autism or ADHD or both of them. And I just think, if I'd realised, or if there's been something there when I was younger, then maybe that would have changed, certain experiences in my sort of school life, earlier life, because I always knew there was something different there. I didn't quite realise what it was or thought of what it was. But almost, for me now, I see, when you see children who do present differently, then it gives me more of because I've had the lived experience, and I want those children to almost have what I didn't have when I was younger. And, whether I've got, whether I'm diagnosed with autism or ADHD or both or not is almost irrelevant to a point, because I sort of become a lot more comfortable with who I am and what I do. But it's almost, it gives me an extra sort of slant with particular children and their families, because when you mention this to sort of other adults, there's a lot more acceptance of it, which is really, really good.
No, brilliant. Simon, time has caught up with us, but it has been an absolutely amazing opportunity to talk to you. And the fact that, like you say, you're using your lived experience to support others, it's brilliant. And the conversations need to keep happening. That support needs to be there. So Simon, thank you so much for taking the time to come on to Circle Time.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Glenn, for inviting me on.
Absolute pleasure. Simon Airey.